Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
I am ready to be rapidly fired.
Okay, so you left Riley Leonard out of your ranking of your top 5 players on the Notre Dame football roster yesterday. Why do you hate Riley Leonard?
Um, I got bullied into putting Riley Leonard back in my top 5, but I now that
I
you've
don't remember
re-asked,
hearing that. I don't remember hearing that asked of it. Maybe it was just my partial hearing. I don't know.
but I'm gonna keep him still out of my top. Listen, I'm talking about the way I did my analysis was people who are not replaceable, but who's got that best trajectory to the who is the diamond in their group. You know what I mean? Riley Leonard is a very good player.
You're telling me Riley Leonard's not a diamond in their group?
He's not. He's not. He is good, but there are a lot of players who I think could do what Riley Leonard does. Is what I'm getting at the end of the day. I don't think he's like the top 5, top 1% of college football quarterbacks. I think that Benjamin Morrison is a top tier 1% corner. I think Xavier Watts is a top tier safety. I think that Howard Cross is a top tier defensive tackle. I think Jeremiah Love is a top tier running back. And I can't remember who my 5th. I think Mitchell Evans was my 5th after that, a healthy Mitchell Evans. So I guess I would like to spin the question back to you is who would be in your top 5?
Well, I was about to give it to you. I was a little bit shocked that you put Mitchell Evans in there, to be quite honest. Like when you look at now again, okay, if you want to play devil's advocate, part of Mitchell Evans' production, part of it has to do with his health and the fact that he's just finally got past, a full year being past having surgery and all that kind of stuff last October. And you do rely on the quarterback getting you the ball. I think Mitchell Evans has been fine, but if I'm going with my top 5 on this team, and now Benjamin Morrison, we're kind of giving, an asterisk, obviously, since he is not playing right now, but he was part of this team. I would still include him in there, but I would go Jeremiah Love. I would go Xavier Watts. I would go Benjamin Morrison. I would go Riley Leonard, and I would go Billy Schrauth. Those would be my top 5.
So I would like to amend mine with Billy Schrauth as well. Vince brought that up yesterday. I would like to I would be comfortable swapping Billy Schrauth for Mitchell Evans, but I will not swap Riley Leonard into my top 5. And let me ask you this. What is more crazy of a thought? Jeremiah Love not being in your top 5 or Riley Leonard not being in your top 5?
Ooh, well, I think it's more crazy to say Jeremiah Love, but you're talking about top 1%. So you're talking about the whole nation. But I mean, if you look at who's available on this roster, if you swap Jeremiah Love out for Jadarian Price, you've still got a really good replacement level running back. You're still winning a lot of games with Jadarian Price and Aeneas Williams, like if you didn't have Jeremiah Love, right?
Right.
Just for starters. If you took Xavier Watts out, he, Adon Schuler is really good. Luke Talich showed some nice things last week. Who knows what the back end of that secondary looks like if you don't have Xavier Watts. So he's a no-brainer, to have on your list there. We talked about what our concern level is with no Howard Cross this week. I still think they're going to be pretty good against Virginia without Howard Cross this week. Maybe if Riley Leonard was not on the field, you'd still be okay against Virginia. Benjamin Morrison, they've, as great as Benjamin Morrison is, they've obviously shown that they can still win some games, over this last month without him. Billy Schrauth, look at the impact. Look how much better the offensive line looks with Billy Schrauth. If you took Riley Leonard out and you're going up against a playoff caliber team without Riley Leonard, what's your confidence then? If you're going from Riley Leonard to Angeli going into a playoff situation, are you feeling pretty confident in that situation?
I would feel you're basically asking me to swap in everyone's backup and tell me how comfortable I would feel. Unfortunately for me, Would not feel good if Steve Angeli is leading me in the playoffs.
I rest my case.
So
Case closed, counselor.
His importance to Notre Dame, yes, but I think I'm straddling that line of also importance to Notre Dame, but also projectability to the NFL level. So that's where I'm getting a little bit caught up. But I'm just
basing it on what helps this team win games. You know, like what
and Riley, if that's the circumstance, then yes. And I think that's how the question was posed yesterday. So I would have to, my final list: Benjamin Morrison, Xavier Watts, Billy Strouth, Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Love.
Okay. We're all in the same boat then. See, so you don't hate Riley Leonard. I'm happy you worked that out. Is there one team ranked ahead of Notre Dame right now this week that you are most convinced the Irish should be ranked ahead of?
Let me just make sure I have all of my rankings in a row. I always see. This was tough because Vince and I were talking about this yesterday. I know they're better than BYU, but BYU is technically undefeated, so I don't have a problem with them being ahead of them.
Right.
Same with IU. I guess for the fun of it, I'll say Penn State, but everyone else I'm cool with.
Just for the fun of it.
I think that they would have their way with Penn State. But I even said this yesterday to Vince. Whoever BYU plays in that first game, they're getting steamrolled by. I don't care.
I don't disagree. I don't just, like you said.
But they deserve that spot because they are 9-0.
You can at least justify BYU and Indiana being 1 and 2 spots ahead of Notre Dame because they're undefeated, right? Like you can stomach that.
Even if you don't think they're better, they still deserve that spot.
Yeah. Really, when it comes down to it, like Texas only has like one, like when you're looking at quality wins, Texas compared to Penn State, at least Texas beat Michigan when they were ranked, even though Michigan is a 500 team right now, but at least they were ranked when they were played. But that was largely based off the fact that they won a championship. It was like more based off last year, but like when you look at the actual resumes, like Texas and Penn State have both lost to ranked teams. And that's kind of what keeps them where they are from a pure who have they beaten standpoint. Neither one of them has really beaten anyone better than, like what Indiana has beaten this year. But like, to me, it is Penn State. Like last week, I was a little bit more, I really don't have a problem with Penn State. But like, why does Penn State keep going up in the rankings? They still haven't beaten anybody else, and they're just getting so much credit for playing a close game against Ohio State. And like the most they've scored against a Power 4 team, for example, is 35 points against Washington. Not a good team. I would see Notre Dame and Penn State playing out somewhat similarly to Notre Dame and Texas A&M. I think that Penn State's defense is good enough, to at least limit Notre Dame to an extent. But from an offensive standpoint, I just don't see the dynamic, explosive type players. I think Notre Dame would make more explosive plays and they would win against Penn State. Like that's how I see it playing out. I just feel like that they're getting way too much credit for losing to Ohio State.
In a sloppy game. That game was sloppy.
Right. Considering like if Howard doesn't throw the pick six, Will Howard doesn't throw the pick six, and if he doesn't have the fumble like right at the goal line, then it's much closer. Ohio State's much closer to a 27-6 victory than 20-13. Like they're getting credit for keeping the game close, but it was a very sloppy game. So they're getting way too much credit for losing a close game against Ohio State. Andre says, in or out, a good loss versus a bad loss. Is there such a thing?
No, a loss is a loss, no matter if it's by 1 or 30. Unless a team scores on the very last play of the game on some crazy play. So I guess I have to go back on my answer.
I don't know. I think that I do think there is such a thing, a good loss versus a bad loss, because again, Texas lost to Georgia, and I think the committee is seeing that as a good loss. Penn State lost to Ohio State. I think the committee is seeing that because look at where Notre Dame is ranked versus where those two teams are ranked. Penn State and Texas are both sitting there at 4-3. Penn State is 4, Texas is 3. Their losses are to, both of them home losses, by the way, but they are that much higher than Notre Dame. And I think it's all because of who they lost to. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Those two teams lost to ranked teams. They were all home losses, but those two teams lost to ranked teams at home versus an unranked 500 MAC team now. So I think in the committee's eyes, there is a different, there is a good loss versus a bad loss. I think the way they're looking at it. So even though they might not ever come out and say it, but is there a team that you would want Notre Dame to avoid in the playoffs? Like, is there a team Notre Dame should want to avoid if they're in the playoffs?
Yes. Ole Miss and Ohio State.
Interesting. I feel like this is, didn't we talk about this last week? I feel like if Notre Dame played Ohio State this year,
just not who I want to play round one.
Oh, sure. Like round one.
I thought that was like first round of the playoff. Who am I trying to avoid?
Yeah, I can see.
That's kind of how I took it, because I think at some point you're going to play someone good in the playoff, right? Like if you keep winning. But first round, and that's again how I kind of took this question. I would not want to see Ole Miss, and I would not want to see Ohio State, because I think they're going to play a 2-loss SEC team or a 2-loss Ohio State or a 1-loss IU. I think that's and again, that's a broad group, but that's kind of where I think they're standing right now. And of that group, Ole Miss and Ohio State would scare me the most.
Honestly, there's not a team that I would want to avoid. I think they'll all be pretty solid teams in the first round. I know, like you've talked about not wanting to face one of these SEC 2-loss teams or even a 3-loss team in the first round. I just look at it like anyone is beatable, and this whole thing is so wide open. It is, there's so much. I don't think it's total parity, but it's so much closer to parity than there's ever been before. There's not a dominant team this year, so honestly, there's just not a team that I would say.
What scares me about
avoid that team.
What scares me about Ole Miss is they brought in a really good defensive line in the transfer portal to bulk up for Georgia and to stop to not get manhandled in the trenches. By Georgia. And it worked, and that's the bread and butter of Notre Dame's offense, is being able to run the ball and control the line of scrimmage. And so if they were in a stalemate in that battle, I don't know if Notre Dame has enough in the wide receiver game to overcome it. You know what I mean? That's the part I would be scared about.
Yeah.
Especially if it were at Ole Miss for some reason.
But again, I think that Notre Dame's defense, Notre Dame's defense is the X factor and should be able to keep the game close.
It would be close, but would Notre Dame have enough if that run game isn't working to pull out a close one in the end?
Right.
That's what I'm scared of.
And like do the floodgate, and like if the offense is not able, to be effective enough, does a game maybe get out of hand,
and then do they have enough to keep up if they're down, 14 or maybe 17 or something like that?
Right. DJ, I think this is going back to what we were talking about, with the, good loss versus bad loss. DJ says, okay, but they don't look at it correctly. Well, that's your opinion. Obviously, in their opinion, again,
and their opinion is the one that matters.
Yeah, their opinion is the one that matters, whether they look at it correctly or not. And again, like when you look at who the teams are with one, the teams in the top 10 or the top 9 basically with one loss are Ohio State, Texas, Penn State. They've all lost to ranked teams, and they are sitting there at 2, 3, and 4. Then you've got unbeaten Indiana, unbeaten BYU at 5 and 6, a 1-loss Tennessee team. Now, they lost to Arkansas, but they are one spot, ahead of Notre Dame. But again, Arkansas versus Northern Illinois, so again, and then you look at Miami at 9 and 1, and they are one spot behind Notre Dame at number 9. Well, Notre Dame just beat Georgia Tech a couple of weeks ago. Miami just lost to Georgia Tech. So I think that when you look at how things are laid out there, they're definitely differentiating between who did they lose to. That's when you look at the way they've got it ranked, that's exactly how it lays out. It's who they lost to is how they're differentiating those teams. So like whether we like it or not, that's how they're parsing it out. Fill in the blank. Yesterday was college basketball signing day, and it's blank that Micah Shrewsberry signed a nearly consensus top 5 recruiting class that is the highest rated Notre Dame class in the modern recruiting era.
It's absolutely electric. And it's electric for the reason that we've never seen a recruiting class like this. And I think we're going to enter an era of Notre Dame basketball that we haven't seen before as well. I love Mike Bray. I love what he did for the program and, all of that good stuff. But he ran a system and a certain type of, let's control the clock, get a good shot type of offense. I think you're going to see a lot of just playmakers for Notre Dame, guys who can shoot it, guys who can run the floor, guys who just have ultimate athleticism. And again, it's just, there's nothing wrong with it, but this brand of basketball is just going to be different than Bray's, and it's going to be electric in my opinion. It's going to be what the fans want. It's going to be high pace. It's going to be scoring. It's going to be good defense on the back end. And so the more that Shrewsberry, like we saw the foundation last season, right? And we're like, man, just think if he had some good players, and now you add this top recruiting class, I think good things are coming, and it's something to be electric about as fans.
And it is just, it's amazing to think that in year 2, Micah Shrewsberry has the second highest rated recruiting class in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Like, would you have ever thought that Notre Dame would have the number 2 recruiting class in the ACC? I wouldn't have. And I I agree with everything that you just said. Like it's coming. It's coming very soon. And it's amazing that Micah Shrewsberry has been able to do this in a really short amount of time. And that's obviously why they felt so much confidence in a guy like him and going out and getting him from Penn State. So I was just flabbergasted to see this ranking when it came out yesterday. But man, they're going to have some players, and I'm granted, like who they played. They haven't played any world beaters yet, and the schedule is not going to be the easiest schedule this year. But I'm very cautiously optimistic about what they can be this year, just in year 2 for Micah Shrewsberry. So speaking of recruiting, we're going to flip it to the women's side now, because for the second recruiting cycle in a row, Niele Ivey signed just one player in a class. Last year it was Kate Koval, a post player. This year it's 5-star forward Leah Macy. And so in my pregame interview on the Notre Dame radio network last night, I asked Niele Ivey about being selective and, signing just one player 2 years in a row. And here's what she said.
Have to, fortunately, the transfer portal has been really good to us. But as far as just what we need, I try to replenish the things that we need. And after the season, figure out what that looks like, because that's a big part of recruiting. So being very selective and just trying to make sure I have the right identity, the right fit for our culture.
So I posted the story about, signing Macy on the boards yesterday. And, I think it was Played Like a Champion, who's a really, fervent Notre Dame women's basketball fan. We have a lot of Notre Dame women's basketball fans, both on the boards and in the shows and stuff like that. But like, he was very opposed to only signing the one player because of the fact, like, you're going to lose Maddie Westbeld next year. You're going to lose Sonia Citron for certain next year. There's a good chance you'll lose Olivia Miles next year as well, and so they brought in a post this year. They're bringing in a forward next year. So what do you think, Jess? Do you buy or sell signing just, one player and both of them being front court players 2 cycles in a row?
I buy it, and I buy it because I believe Niele knows more about me than her team and the needs of her team. And I think a good fallback is the transfer portal, and that's something that she mentioned as well. Like if something does happen, or in an emergent situation, you feel like you need this or that, you can go get a quality, proven player in the portal. And I think what Niele Ivey is ultimately getting at, and she didn't say it, but what I took from this is she recruits players who are going to play here at a high level for 3 to 4 seasons, and you don't need an abundance of mouths to feed when they're all the top players in the country, right? You don't need a 5-star sitting on the bench because they're sitting behind a freshman point guard who is going to play all 3 or 4 years here, right? And so there's no reason to be backlogged with 5 years, all these high-end recruits who are going to get mad that they're not playing and eventually leave, right? Like it's not the men's where you can get drafted after 1 year, and the women's you gotta stick it out, right? And so I think that's a big factor in this thing of when she's looking at it, she's looking at someone who's going to be a high quality player for 3 to 4 seasons, and you don't need multiple of those type of players.
Not only that, but the other side of the, and I agree with what you're saying. The other side of it is you get in trouble with your roster building when you settle on someone as well, and you bring in someone just to fill a roster spot, like all of a sudden, okay, like the standard, like with all these 5-stars, she signed 5 stars. And I did mess up, when I wrote this up yesterday because I left Kassan Prosper out of the story. And then I think I mentioned it. I remember, I was talking about, them signing Leah Macy at one point during the game last night. And I think I said 5, and then I rattled off the names, and there were only 4 names. And I remember looking at it, and I'm like, hold it. I just said 5, but those were only 4 names. And Kassan Prosper is one of them. Koval is another. Macy is one. Hidalgo is one. And Emma Risch is another one. But, my point was going to be, when you settle just to bring in and say that you've got someone, well, like those players end up sitting on the bench and causing problems, when that's what you're doing, like, look, they don't need, they don't need to go out and bring in like an Abby Prohaska as an example, like someone's like, oh, like the home fans, she was almost like an overblown walk-on, like they get excited when she goes out there on the court, and it's like, oh, Abby's in the game and that kind of stuff, like she averaged 10.5 points a game in her 5th season last year at San Diego State. That was her peak. You're better off you're basically better off letting someone else develop the 3-star, and then you bring them in. Yeah. And then you bring them in out of the transfer portal, like they overplay their star rating someplace else at a smaller school. And now you bring them in, just kind of like Liza Carlin, like she was a bit under-recruited, coming out of high school, like she was recruited, but, like she told me when I did that interview with her a few months back that, like her phone just blew up the minute her name went into the transfer portal. And it wasn't necessarily like that when she was coming out of high school. And the track record that Ivy's got going out and getting those players out of the portal, I completely agree. It's like, wait, reassess, see what you've got. And I think that they can go out and address that via the portal next year. So I don't think it's the end of the world. I get, like maybe you would want another player, but like if you would, like if you had brought one in last year, for example, like you've got Olivia Miles and Hannah Hidalgo and Sonia Citron just to start off with in the backcourt. And then you've got Emma Risch coming back, and you also have KK Bransford coming back next year. Like they've got 7 McDonald's All-Americans on the roster right now. And the only reason they don't have 9 is because Prosper is from Canada. So she couldn't be a McDonald's All-American. And Olivia Miles enrolled in the middle of that COVID season, that would have been her senior season in high school. So she didn't qualify to be a McDonald's All-American. So they would have 9 basically McDonald's All-Americans on the roster.
A lot of mouths to feed.
Yes.
And only start 5 at a time.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Joe, have a good one. We will see you later. And, DJ was asking earlier.
Well,
how many? Go ahead.
Indy Sailor said, how come Gino Auriemma never had a problem with the 5 stars on his bench? Well, he did it during basically the Nick Saban era where you didn't have to worry about the transfer portal and the NIL.
That's exactly it.
Players can just leave if they're not getting the money or the playing time that they want. You kind of used to be stuck, on these teams essentially. And Nick Saban and Gino could just say, well, you're not good enough yet, and we'll develop you. And
you're going to win national championship.
Yeah, by the time you're a junior and a senior, you'll get your shot and win a national championship.
I mean, that's basically how between UConn and Tennessee, I mean, the reason that there was so much animosity, like between Gino and Pat Summitt, was because they were all recruiting the same players, and there were only so many places they could go, and so so they were always butting heads on the recruiting trail, and then they played each other every year, and that's basically it. They were stockpiling the vast majority of the talent, whereas now, that's why Gino Auriemma continues to
shout out.
Yeah, he's jealous of all the attention that Caitlin Clark got last year, for example. The reason he keeps saying, "Oh, Paige Beckers is better than Caitlin Clark." Well, you didn't recruit Caitlin Clark. Maybe it's because, you knew that, she wasn't going to go there anyway. But, that's exactly it. Gino Auriemma, had the market cornered on it for a long time. And now he's ticked off that all that, he's still getting good talent going to UConn. Don't get me wrong, but
he just doesn't have the depth like he used to.
He's not getting it like he used to. Yeah. So Kansas plays BYU this week and Colorado next week. Scale of 1 to 10. Your confidence the Jayhawks will win one of those games.
I'm actually going to go 50-50 on this one. I think KU, I think they have a shot. I think it's I think they win one or the other. I think they've been playing great football as of recent, and especially last week coming off the big win. Some kind of big momentum going into the season, and this kind of goes into what I was talking about earlier. You come to the realization of who you are as a team kind of late in the season and what you're playing for, and I think they have no problem playing a spoiler right now, and that's what they're going to do.
John's very confident, 10 out of 10. DJ is an 8. Man, do I want him to win one of them? Of course, but, I guess it really doesn't help that much if they beat Colorado, other than maybe they keep Colorado out of the Big 12 championship game, and that, they would have the best chance to beat BYU. I'm at a 4. I'm not quite as confident, but the Jayhawks are they're definitely trending in the right direction. I mean, I think that they're the team. Like, if you're BYU and Colorado, I don't think you're looking forward to playing Kansas these next couple of weeks. They beat Houston, who beat Kansas State. KU barely lost to Kansas State a few weeks ago. They put 45 on Iowa State and beat them. 5 of their 6 losses are by 1 possession this year. They can score, and Colorado can be scored on. So I'm not quite as confident as some of the rest of you guys, but I'm going to put my confidence at a 4. I think they've got a really good shot to win. I think they're at the very least going to put a scare into one of those two teams. The question is, can they finish because of all those close losses I was talking about that they've got this year? Larry's asking Penn State's best win. Again, well, I guess we were talking about Texas. I mean, what is Penn State's best win is Illinois, when Illinois was ranked 19th. And Illinois is not nearly as good, but they're a 3-loss team right now. But they also lost to Oregon a couple of weeks ago, but then they lost to Minnesota. I mean, that's Illinois' best win. And like I said, when you look at the 1-loss teams and who they lost to, the committee has definitely ranked them in terms of who the losses were to. That obviously matters to the committee. I don't want to get stuck on that like a broken record. Fill in the blank. Speaking of Colorado, Deion Sanders in Colorado going 7-2 while winning 6 of their last 7 games is blank.
Oh, man. I had this in my head all day. Oh, I got it now. It came back to me.
You found it.
Deion Sanders in Colorado going 7-2 after starting 1-2 and winning 6 of their last games is a whole lot of "I told you so" from Deion Sanders and the boys from Colorado, right? Because I feel like Deion caught a lot of flack, maybe deservedly so, right, for how he handled his transition into becoming a head coach at Colorado, but he low-key guaranteed victories, right? And he said this program's going to get turned around. And what a lot of people do, they made fun of him last year for, I think, going like 6-6 and not really doing a whole lot. But I mean, this season they're already back to 7-2, and you got to remember 2 seasons ago they won like 1 game, no games, and now there's serious contention that they can win the Big Ten championship, right, or at least have a shot at winning the Big 12 championship. So to me, this is Deion Sanders saying loud and proud, "I told you, fool." So,
to Go ahead.
And he would say it not nearly as nice as I would have.
To me, it's shocking, but what's most shocking about it is how quietly it's happened, because there was all this Deion noise at the start of it. Like, he was getting all the attention, especially, okay, you beat a team that just went to the playoff, TCU, to open up the season. But there was all this, and then the season obviously fell off. They ended up being a 4-win team. Well, now they're a 7-win team, and nobody's talking about it. And it's like, is it because of all the, how loud everything was before with Deion? Like, did that quiet it down, like the way he's treated the media? So the media is just basically saying, well, we really don't care about it that much.
We're not going to cover it.
Like, did you bite the hand that feeds you? Like, did Deion not realize that can come back on you as well? Because it's amazing to me how under the radar this is, because they're not necessarily and they're not a national championship contender, but they are at the very least a conference championship contender. And as we all know, if you win your conference championship game, you get an automatic bid into the playoffs, like the 4 highest, ranked conference champions. So I guess, I don't know. It's, like I said, it's crazy. The other thing is the 4-loss team last year, just in terms of TV ratings, they were getting, like, there were a lot more people watching this year, but the ratings are, I don't think it's quite half, but there's just not nearly as much interest in this whole thing. And I wonder if it's just because Deion blew up so much last year that I
think it's worn
some
off.
Backlash as a result. Yeah.
Naturally, it's worn off. And he's kind of cut the media. They kind of cut each other off to a degree, right? Like, so I just think there's not as much media coverage. And it's just, honestly, I don't think people care anymore. It gets to a point where you don't want to talk about the same thing over and over again. It gets tiresome, right? And so that's personally how I like it too. I just like, let Deion do his thing. Let him win football games. If it blows up in his face, it blows up in his face. But he's got to be the one to live with that.
I mean, Andre says they've only won 3 more games than they won last year. So let's see how the rest. But I mean, they won 1 game the year before he got there. So no matter what, I mean,
they're already bowl eligible.
Game. Yeah, like they've already succeeded, no matter what happens.
And they're probably a favorite in those last 3 games.
Mm-hmm. Did you have something you want to finish us up with?
Oh, yeah, I do. Thank you for reminding me. This isn't anything crazy. You'll probably say, why did you waste my time? But I thought it was fun. So I got an email today from the Guardians, and they essentially asked, or they're replacing all of the seats in their stadium. And so they're going to put them up for sale. And so my question to you, and also to the general public, is it fair or foul for me to purchase 2 of these seats from the old Guardian Stadium?
You want me to put these in here?
Yeah. It's nothing crazy. Again, it's just your standard, typical, Guardian seats. But let me give my rationale here. The Cubs won the World Series inside this stadium, and I think it would be pretty cool to have a piece from that and an eventual man cave someday and say, again, the Guardians aren't my favorite team. I've gone to a ton of games because I live in Cleveland. But at the end of the day, the Cubs clinched the World Series inside this stadium, and so to have a piece of it would be pretty freaking cool to me.
I would do it. I would buy them. How much are they going for?
What do you think they're going for us? That set of 2 right there.
I would say at least $200.
$300.
300. $300. That's not bad.
I got Naomi to say she'd pitch in 50, so I'm already down to 250.
I would do it. I would jump on it. And I think like you said, you're a Cubs fan, and the fact that the Cubs won their World Series in that stadium, I think you do it. You got to go for it.
And then anytime I watch a Cubs game, I can sit in that seat knowing that that's where they won the World Series.
Yeah, it's a good conversation piece.
That's what I mean. And then be like, oh, well, why aren't you a Cleveland fan if you bought Cleveland? Well, because my team won the World Series, and I lived in Cleveland and got the opportunity to buy the seats.
Andre asking cost, what'd you say, $300? How we do it?
$300, yeah. So I think I'm going to, but I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't crazy. That's all I got. That was my fair or foul question to
All right.
to wrap
I
us
like
up
it.
today.
Do it. Go for it. Make it happen. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up with that. Great stuff. A lot of great questions on the show tonight in, we out. Notre Dame, Virginia, coming up this weekend. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week on Ivy Nation Sports Talk.